Hello again, everyone. If you've been watching this series, which you probably should have from the beginning, since it is very much a series, each one builds on the last in some way, you may be aware that what you see here was at one point a bundle, a fash of wires. Same root word as fascists. A fashed bundle is a central symbol of fascism because it is the basic thesis of the ideology made manifest, that those who will not come together naturally must be forced to come together more or less at gunpoint for the good of the nation. And I don't hold with that. And neither should you. Neither should anyone. Bringing people together by force can produce a sort of temporary unity sometimes, but it is a dark unity entirely powered by evil, by its inherent nature. It is the kind of unity that destroys other things rather than builds them up. And that's not what America is about. It's never been what America is about, and God Almighty willing, which is pretty clear that God Almighty is willing, since, they altered the course of America's destiny and made me president in order to stop that exact sort of thing from coming to pass. It never will be. I am the president-elect of the United States. You probably haven't heard of me. I have seen obnoxiously little chatter about this sort of thing on the internet since the first day when it initially happened. I'm a little curious as to why. And I want to find out why that is soon, hopefully. Maybe tomorrow the Secret Service will finally get its act together and come over here to talk to me. Maybe not. We'll see. But the truth of the matter is, fascism is on the rise once again throughout the world. And once again, just like last time, I am going to make America part of the coalition that puts it back in the ground where it belongs as a dead and defeated ideology. Now, there are some good points to communism, which is not as dead as fascism, not nearly, and for good reason. America is not a communist country, but I can respect the ideological basis behind communism. It is actually very much in accordance with American Christian values, even if not American political values. The basic tenet of communism is that everybody deserves a fair share. That's when you boil it down to its corest essence, that's the basis of communism. Everybody deserves a fair share. And they're right. They do. Now, when you try to put communism into practice, that's never actually been what's happened throughout the entire history of communism. As I said, I can respect its ideological grounding, but where it really falls down and falls down hard is execution of that ideological grounding, moving from theory to practice. Because the big problem with things that work in theory is that you cannot actually take your possessions and move to theory where those things would work. So, yeah, that's a giant issue. And it's one that no communist country has ever successfully tackled. This huge problem with trying to go from the theoretics to the practical. Now, capitalism has its share of problems too, and so does democracy. Democracy is the worst ideological basis for a country in the entire world that humanity has ever tried, except for all the other ones we've ever tried. Now, does that make it the best? No, but it does make it the least worst. which is not quite the same thing, but close enough for government work, which is rather the problem here. When trying to make a government work, you can't really choose the best theoretical framework because those never actually work in practice. The human element always ends up defeating them. Humans do not function in practice the way theoretics say we should, regardless of which theoretics you're talking about. Humans are diverse. Humans have their own specific and very individual and personal wants and desires about anything you care to name, and always have. That has always been a big part of any radical ideological basis like, say, communism, in that taking into account the human factor is hard, and always has been, and always will be. It is very difficult to account for human diversity of thought, emotion, opinion, physiology, etc., etc., etc. Humans are an obnoxiously diverse group of people, and quite a few of them are obnoxious as a separate category, which makes any kind of philosophical grounding that is not based on pure analysis of human behavior over a longitudinal level that has not been achievable since the development of science. We are talking 1,000 years of scientific analysis of human behavior would be needed to actually make a functional, fully functional government. And until very, very recently, we have not had the ability to get enough detail on why humans behave the way they do to create something that would actually work over the long term and be stable and be organized and be largely, at least, immune to the corruptive, corrosive influence of human greed. Humans are, at least somewhat by nature, a very greedy species. We always have been, as far as I can tell, we always will be. We're not interested most of the time in what is good for everyone if it is not also good for us personally. And that, for intuitively obvious reasons, is something of a problem. And for equally intuitively obvious reasons, always has been something of a problem. Human behavior tends to favor those who look out for only themselves and their immediate circle. Because for the longest time, that was how you survived when things reached a crisis point, and for an equally long time, things reached a crisis point so commonly that becoming the instinctive default behavior got hardwired into our genes. That's not good, because these days, behaving that way will destroy a civilization. Civilization was really, in my point of view, where humanity reached a kind of turning point where what we in the modern world define as traditional virtues became more advantageous to survival than the opposite. We see behaviors that would classically be defined as evil in things as diverse as plants, animals, fungi, and microbes. We do not mostly see things that would equally be defined as virtuous in those creatures, with certain notable exceptions. And all of those exceptions are ones that have found enhanced survival through the formation of semi-organized group behavior. Wolves, lions, ants, bees, flocks of birds. All of these have been seen by many cultures throughout the world as signs of virtue and divine favor, because like humans, they organize themselves around group-based strategies. As I mentioned in a previous video, in a wild wolf pack, you find the alpha, so to speak, quote unquote. You find them at the back of the pack, not its front, making sure no one falls behind, no one gets left behind, no one gets lost. That is the true sign of leadership. Leading from the front is only for crisis situations. In non-crisis situations, the leader stays in the background, making sure nobody falls behind. And even in certain kinds of crisis situations, that can be very advantageous for group survival, is for the leader to hang back and make sure nobody falls behind, only rushing in at moments of pinnacle danger where the group is actively under attack. That is how a hierarchical society has to work, and humans at some level are inherently hierarchical. This is part of why communism routinely fails, because of that hierarchical instinct in humans. Humans look for what one science fiction author termed an aiji, the leader that you look to in a moment of doubt or panic or uncertainty is your aiji. And this is how humans organize themselves. They have layer upon layer upon layer of these people. First, you have the children looking to their parents for guidance. Then you have parents looking to a shift foreman or a head of their Rotary Club or whatever like that, their Elks Club, their secret society, their fraternity or sorority. And in most of these cases, these are younger adults that are like this at first. Then as you rise to become foreman or head of the sorority or what have you, you look to the chief foreman of the entire factory for guidance. Then the chief foreman of the entire factory looks to the head of the company for guidance. And then the head of the company looks to political leadership or religious leadership and so on for guidance. Take the priesthood of the Roman Catholic Church. You have your parish priest. They look to the local bishop. The bishop looks to the cardinal. The cardinal, in turn, looks to the pope. Layer upon layer, up and up, various and assorted chains of command for guidance and authority when in times of uncertainty or doubt. That seems to be very instinctive. Even in the most primitivist, basic, tribal, low-tech societies we have ever observed throughout the world, there are always some level or variance of hierarchy. It's eternal, it's constant. What forms those hierarchies take are very, very variable. In some cultures, young adults are treated as more likely to be successful in leadership because they've got more skin in the game. They have to think longer term than the old people because the old people won't be here very long. To some degree, America is like that. In fashion and in technology, it is the young Turks, the new kids, that we hail as the innovators, the leaders, the people showing the way forward. In political leadership, though, it's mostly the opposite. It is the old codgers who've been around, who've seen a thing or two, who don't have as much skin in the game because they won't be here as long, but they have more accumulated wisdom to work with, trying to make a good plan that's gonna save the day when things get bad. Similarly, in our military, it is mostly the older people, especially older men, that are seen as more likely to have the kind of leadership qualities that are needed for a successful war. A lot of things have other criteria. Some cultures, women are in charge, matriarchies. The mother of the house is its leader. Other cultures are patriarchal. The father of the family is the leader. Some, very few cultures, and mostly ones in a state of transition, which in America is kind of what's happening here. The culture is in a state of flux. We see a period, typically, not an eternal state. That is very rare, although it has happened now and then. And it is something that I personally feel should be aspired to, where neither men nor women are seen as inherent de facto leadership in general, but there will be specific, tightly circumscribed and definitely culturally predefined areas where each one cedes control to the other because that is women's things. This is men's things. And so, like, say, hunting. Hunting is almost always seen as a man's thing in almost every culture that has a widespread hunting tradition. Almost every culture that gets to the point of widespread use of textiles, cloth, as opposed to just leather and skins, it is seen as a women's thing to work with cloth. Those are two very rare examples I can think of where it's very universal which side it is seen as their specific thing. Women work with cloth, men do hunting. The two do not mostly overlap in that area. Another thing which is very common throughout the world that it is that way is women are cat people, men are dog people. Throughout the overwhelming majority of the world, that is how it is seen. Women keep cats as pets, men keep dogs as pets. Now, none of these things are absolutely universal, certainly. There are definitely cultures where any of the things I've just listed are or have previously been not that way. Case in point, the overwhelming majority of the world sees cookery and producing of food from raw materials into a finished edible product as a women's thing. Except France. And more specifically, the world of haute cuisine is overwhelmingly male-dominated to the point of insanity. To the point where it was seen as unrealistic, fake inclusivity to have a female chef as a core part of the kitchen in the movie Ratatouille, to the point that they had to add a brief scene in the movie where she points out, deliberately lampshades, the near impossibility of her presence, and girl bosses so hard it frightened some members of the audience to show why she has been able to be present in such a capacity and challenge the head chef successfully as a core part of the movie. That is a little bit crazy as far as I'm concerned. Women being excluded so aggressively from the haute cuisine milieu does not make sense to me at any imaginable level, since almost every woman in the entire world has been trained at least a little bit in comparison to her male counterparts from a young age to expect cooking food to be a standard part of her duties as part of her daily life. Why you would exclude women from the highest levels of food cooking when that is the case, in fact, how that is possible, confuses, baffles, and kind of irritates me. But I'm not here to try to control the behavior of French cooks. I'm not here really to control anyone's behavior per se. I'm here to be the future president of the United States of America. It's what I do, right? It's my job. It's my destiny, apparently. So I'm going to do the best I can doing that, rather than try to, be president of France or something, because I'm not French. I am not elected president of France. I'm pretty sure I couldn't even be elected president of France. So why would I try to tell the French how to run their country? That doesn't make sense to me. What does make sense to me is that in America, we really need to have a hard talk about the lack of top-tier chefs that are women in this country, honestly. That's a serious matter that needs to be addressed aggressively. And similarly, we need to talk about the lack of men stepping into women's traditional roles as well. Recently, after some pressure from all sides to allow girls in Boy Scouts, the Boy Scouts of America changed their name to simply Scouting and started allowing girls into Boy Scout troops. The opposite did not occur. That bothers me. Honestly, I really think that what should have been forced to happen was both Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts were aggressively forced to merge into a single scouting organization that was neither for boys or girls. It was for whichever wanted to show up. Now, here's where I draw a little line on that. That should have been true at the Brownies or Cub Scouts level, but they should have remained separated when you passed the, as I was a Cub Scout when I was younger, when you passed the Webelow stage. You should, at that point, separate off into, teenagers should separate into Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts as, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, separate troops normally, but they come together for certain major events under tight parental and scout leader scrutiny, because underage pregnancy is not a good thing in most cases. And you just know that if they're together all the time, that sort of thing is going to happen, and it's going to happen a lot. Now, here's the thing, though. While that would be a valid point, right? With preteens, that's not an issue. They're not even interested in that kind of behavior at any level. Now, I'm going to say something that's probably going to offend some folk. I remember being 13 pretty clearly. I remember drawing in my class books, my notebook for school, very intimately suggestive and equally horribly badly drawn artwork about my teacher and female classmates at the age of 13. Yeah, that's it would have been an absolute unmitigated disaster for me, emotionally, spiritually, physically, at every conceivable level, to have actually been capable of engaging in that kind of behavior at that age. But the desire to do so was there. For me, personally. Maybe I'm weird. Actually, I know for a fact I'm weird. So just chalk that up to my weirdness for now, but it does prove a point that if it has happened, then it can happen, and therefore, after the age of 13 or so, male and female scouting should, for intuitively obvious reasons at this point, be, divided up, men over here, girls over here, well, teenage boys over here, teenage girls over here, not men, not yet, maybe not ever. Some people never really grow out of their boyhood fully. They become physically mature, but not mentally and emotionally mature. That happens to a lot of men in this country right now, and I've already had some conversations about that with you guys, but yeah, there's going to be more. Because there are certain rules that will help you get out of that headspace and into a more mature, adult, functional headspace. It needs to happen. To almost everyone, it is going to wreck your life if you can't break out of your childhood mentality and into a mature adult mentality. It has, in large part, done so to me. I only was able to break out fully from my childhood mentality fairly recently, and I'm 40 now. So, yeah, that wasn't good. Now, on a somewhat related but different topic, this idea that women have to be absolutely equal to men in every respect is flat out insane. This idea that men have to be superior to women in absolutely every respect is flat out insane. This idea that women are superior to men in every respect is flat out insane. Are you recognizing a pattern yet? Men and women are not better than each other. They're not worse either. They are different. Men are not women. Women are not men. They shouldn't be trying to be each other. And here's where things get interesting, because one of the big problems that our society is facing is that each side is trying to be the other in ways that are very unhealthy. I'm not talking about transgender people here. That's not what I'm mentioning. No. Transgender people are people who genuinely feel that they were placed into the wrong body for some reason. Their soul is female in a man's body or male in a female body, and that's wrong. For them, that is wrong. They do not feel comfortable inside their own skin. They do not feel like who they are meant to be. They can and should aggressively embrace the traditional gender roles of whatever gender they feel they are supposed to be as part of transitioning from their present gender to the gender that they want to be part of, because they feel that is what they are most spiritually connected to already. That is something that should happen in those cases. It would make it easier for society to understand and accept. It would make it easier for them to know what they need to do in various tasks on a daily basis, etc., etc., etc. Now, is this absolutely perfect and universal? No, of course not. Nothing is absolutely perfect and universal except for Almighty God. And God is not what a lot of people think God is in certain ways. a lot of people misunderstand even their own religions that they supposedly belong to, interpretation of God. And that's a giant problem unto itself, but it's a separate problem for a separate time. People need to understand, comprehend, and accept that gender roles are not universal. They are very cultural in many ways, but having them is important to the survival and stability of every culture we have ever run into that is thriving and is stable. Whether women are warriors and the men do the courting, or the inverse, is not a universal constant, even among human populations. But having one of the two be that is very, very prevalent. Cultures traditionally have one gender that, typically at least, provides leadership, and the other follows that leadership. This too is not universal. And one of the great things about America is that because we indraw the diversity of all the world to become a part of us, we can use both, where other cultures cannot. We can have a neutral position on that issue. Men can be leaders. Women can be leaders. It goes both ways. Men and women can have leadership positions here. In America, that is possible. Most other places, it isn't. And one of the reasons it's possible, the core reason it's possible here and not there, is that we have these people from all over the world, people who are women, trained by their initial culture to be leaders, to expect a leadership position and have the experience necessary to do well at it, where a culture that is patriarchal in nature inherently and has been for a very, very long time and doesn't have a ready source of these women leader type training figures for other future women leaders, that will be less successful. Almost every culture in the world, the leadership class at some level is trained to it from infancy. That is necessary. At least a little bit. For the upper echelons, that is necessary because such people cannot get a firm enough grasp on the skills they require to excel at that position without training from infancy. That is why, for the longest time, Europe ran with kingdoms. That was their go-to. That was their bag. Europe used kingdoms because if the king's son will be king after him, now there were, of course, a lot of extra reasons. The divine right of kings, bloodlines. It was a whole bag, but the core thing that really made it work when it did work well was that by training the king's son from infancy to know how to be an effective king when his father eventually dies, you can more reliably, if not completely reliably, produce a good king that will be successful as a king when his father dies. And keep in mind, kingship was a dangerous business back then. The king was expected and kind of required to lead their nation from the front in battle. They got killed on the field of battle, not exactly commonly, but it was pretty regular that somewhere in Europe a king would die fighting his enemies. for a very long time, almost 1,000 years. That was pretty, certainly not typical, but it was definitely not unheard of either. And there were a lot of stories and songs and so on. I could sing you a couple. I might do a new I Sing video that encapsulates the events surrounding, like, I think 3 total kings dying in battle fighting for their land. One of them really isn't directly mentioned as having died in battle, although I think he did. 2 of them, actually, I don't think are mentioned as directly dying in battle, but they did, I think, in this one song I'm thinking of. But that's something for a different point in time. That is not a right now kind of a thing. So this is how we got more or less to where we are, because the kings of Europe at a certain point, right around the late Renaissance, stopped leading armies from the forefront and started to hang back more as commanders behind the lines, directing their generals where to go. That change really transformed the nature of kingship and caused, from a certain point of view, a direct questioning by a lot of people: why do we bother having kings anymore if they're not going to lead in battle as they have traditionally done? And that, in turn, by and by, led to the American Revolution, which led to our country's existence. Now, I'm explaining all of that to all of you. Whether or not you believe it, go ahead, check it. It's true as far as I understand it, and if you find out you have something that you radically disagree with in any of these videos, please, by all means, put it down in the comments. I could use more stuff to look into. I could use the advice. I'm a president. That does not make me omniscient. Being omniscient is God's job, so I don't know what I don't know. There are things that I don't know about, and I don't even know that I need to know about them at all. So I don't even know they exist at all, and therefore I need someone else to tell me that they exist, tell me they're important, tell me that I have to do research on them so that then I will know about them, I will know why they're important, and I will know how to use that important thing to help the United States of America thrive. Please, I beg of you, all of you, send me things I need to look into, important matters that you feel are critical to the well-being of the country. I need that. Now, in a related topic to all of the stuff I've just mentioned about, needing to know that stuff, one thing we really need to have a very frank, open, bare bones, no frills, no political rhetoric or bells and whistles conversation about in this country. It is very clear the old gender norms of America have broken down to a large degree. We need to talk about how to build up new gender norms that will work for a broader range of Americans. Okay? Men in this country used to be the ones that went out, did the job, they brought home the money that fed the family, and they were respected and honored for that contribution. That has ceased to be the case quite some years ago. We need to have a frank and open discussion about if both men and women are going to be working, which doesn't seem like it's going to change anytime soon, though I'm going to put effort into bringing America back to the point where we can have a single earner household. But if we're going to have a society where either the man or the woman could be the central breadwinner of the family, we've got to have a conversation about how to be a stay-at-home dad, but in a masculine way. How to divorce that concept of a stay-at-home dad from the idea of motherhood and stay-at-home moms. How to be an effective parent as a father without also being the family breadwinner. That's a conversation we need to have in this country right now. It's a very important thing we need to talk about. I don't have answers for that one yet. I'm working on what will work for me in that sphere. However, mostly what it's proving will work for me in that sphere is being the breadwinner in question. So I can't really per se participate in this conversation because I am more traditionally masculine in that I am the primary earner for my household. I do not feel trying to force women back into that stay-at-home mom role will be either A, productive, or B, feasible. I don't think it's going to work. I think they will aggressively, even violently, resist being shoved back into the whole barefoot, pregnant, and in the kitchen type of mode of living. And that means that since we cannot go backwards, we must instead break out the pickaxes and shovels and cut through the cultural dead end that we have found ourselves in. That is what being a real progressive is about. If you find yourself at a cultural dead end in this giant labyrinthine maze that is cultural development, you don't turn back, you break down the wall. If you have reached a point where there is no further to go within the maze, you don't turn around, you break the wall in front of you as much as it takes to keep making progress. Now, sometimes you start breaking the wall down and you knock out all the bricks and you keep knocking out the bricks, and eventually you realize all that's on the other side of the bricks is rock. Bare, unadorned rock. Now, yes, you can, in theory, keep tunneling in that direction. How do you think the maze got built in the first place? They used bricks to shore up the tunnels that had been dug into the rock by previous generations. And sometimes certain elements of the leadership, in fact, a lot of times, certain elements of the leadership would decide that a particular tunnel, for various reasons, needed to be bricked off and closed, which is why it turned more maze-like and less just a series of branching tunnels. However, because a lot of the time, we'll get back to that, however, but a lot of the time, other people would tunnel into one of those old tunnels from a different angle, and then look at the two ways they had to go and decide to proceed in one of the two directions. And either they would get back to that same blockage, or they would keep going towards the end of the old tunnel that, the reactionary elements had dragged people back from that work face and walled it off for whatever reason. Sometimes they will get to the old end of that tunnel and just keep digging further at that point as a way to make progress. And that turned it more and more into a maze rather than just a series of branch tunnels. And here's where we get back to the however. However, we have navigated and mapped so much of the maze at this point, and we've really kind of gotten it into our heads as a culture that the best way to improve on the existing maps that we've already made through analyzing other cultures all over the world is to knock down all of the walls, expose the bare rock, and figure out where the furthest tunnels lie that we can keep drilling from. But there's a problem with that. Now, it didn't happen very often. A lot of times it was because certain parts of the culture rebelled against the leadership's guidance and they walled off those tunnels to kind of wall away the rebels and let them starve to death in those isolated tunnels. Theoretically, that was the plan, at least. But some of the walls were made for better reasons. In fact, many of them were made for better reasons. As I mentioned, a lot of the time, those bricks shore up weak portions of the tunnels that might otherwise collapse on a culture during the digging. You can't eliminate all the bricks in those sections, or else the tunnel collapses again. That's why they put the bricks in place in the first place. The tricky bit is knowing when you have a tunnel that has a hollow, bricked up end with something actually lying past those bricks, another open area, a further chamber that you can explore, and when it's just support, just shoring up the roof. It's very hard to tell in those cases without just fully breaking through the wall. Now, that means that this idea of just shattering all the bricks, tearing it all down, and exposing the raw stone is both dangerous, and you can also, I think, at this point see why some people were like, hey, that's not a bad idea. Maybe we should just tear out all the bricks and then we'll find all the tunnels. I mean, yes, that's technically accurate, but you will also collapse huge sections of the society on top of your head while you do it, and that's not good. This is the short-term, basic dum-dum kind of thinking that is why we instinctively developed the desire to look to higher levels of leadership that, in theory at least, are smarter than we are and have more experience and so on, or in the case of youth leadership, more creative vision, more imagination, more ability to see the possibilities that others have already dismissed as impossible, because back then they would have been, but now they're not. And it's also why youths, what I just mentioned, is why youths have a certain level of instinctive rebellion against cultural norms, because again, that can lead to better odds of survival when the rebellion goes in the right direction to make progress. Because there's another thing I haven't mentioned about this metaphorical cultural maze we're trying to navigate. It is a maze, and we did create the tunnels ourselves in most cases, but not all of them. This is a maze that has been dug into and around and through a large, not entirely interconnected series of natural caverns that underpin this entire surface-level cultural world. The surface-level culture only survives by extracting resources from the deeps via this tunnel network. The further we tunnel, the more it becomes necessary for us to be careful not to lose sight of the center point where those resources can be utilized. And that center point is the central point of human sociopolitical psychology. The centrists at the middle are the core and heart of every successful culture. The path between all opposite extremes is not necessarily the path of virtue, but it almost always is the path of survival. Now, there are definitely situations where you have to go to extremes to survive, but they are comparatively rare. A lot rarer than people seem to believe they are a lot of the time. A lot of the time, it is not so much going to a further extreme that will lead to your survival, as it is returning towards center, returning towards the balance point, where things are held in a socio-political equilibrium. The scales go up and down, but not too far. They stay close to balance. They may tip a little bit one way or the other, but mostly it's at the middle. It's not too far this way, not too far that way. Mostly it keeps an even keel. Tipping the canoe of the ship of state, to butcher a metaphor, can produce results. It can make waves that cause the fish to jump out of the water where you can catch them, to eat them, to survive. But it also inherently carries the risk to capsize the ship of state as well. When you rock the boat, you are gambling that it will be more helpful than it is detrimental. Now, when the boat is already unstable, that gamble becomes more profitable overall, because rocking the boat, if you do it right in that situation, actually counterbalances the fact that the boat is already rocking to bring it back to stability. In those cases, it is profitable. When things are already stable, rocking the boat tends to be less profitable. It tends to be more likely to cause a capsize in that situation than it is to prevent one. We are right now in a period of instability. Rocking the boat is a better idea now than it would be if things were stable, trying to get it back on course. Things are unstable, and I'm not saying traditional values and stabilization by that method is the answer. Many people throughout history trying such methods have discovered that that winning by that method is just a different way to lose. Things changed from those traditional values already for a reason. There were specific reasons which the people at the time believed were important to change those traditional values. What you have to do in such a situation is figure out where the problems and the instability lay and readopt the rest of the traditional values that were not adopted to fix that instability, that were not changed because that pre-existing instability needed solving, without sacrificing the innovations on those traditional values that have led to progress. It's really not that complicated an idea. Traditional values are not bad, but they're not good either. They are a set of values that can work. As conditions change around you, the values you use to survive in those conditions must inherently change alongside them. It is part and parcel of being human that this will be the case. And it follows from that fact that since this is the case, you have to do what it takes to survive, even if that does mean altering the values you presently live by, but try to preserve as much of those existing values which are still functional as you can, while adapting to changing circumstances with those that have ceased to function effectively for the purpose of guaranteeing survival. Now, this video is, once again, veering close to the hour. You know I like to call it around there. I have not actually managed to make one of these videos under an hour thus far, but I really want to do that today. So here's really my closing thoughts on all this. The present American culture is broken. it's not really working very well for anybody at all. We need to have a hard look at which of the pre-existing American subcultures, of which there are quite a few, have elements of them that can be raised up into the general culture as norm, as the default baseline, to re-stabilize and re-actualize a functioning American culture, versus what parts of the presently unfunctioning American culture, the presently broken American culture, need to be dropped down to subcultural status in order to get things back on a good footing for the nation as a whole, where they have not been at this point for quite some time previous to this present point of time. God himself, by ordering the angels to elect me president, has very clearly made it manifestly obvious to the casual observer that things are not working in God's estimation right now. That means that we need to take a good hard look at why, and the fact that he chose me in particular to be president via the angelic voting means we have to take what I already believed would be good for America as having a little bit, at least, of a divine stamp of approval in this situation. So from there, I would advocate anyone and everyone to really take a hard look at what parts of your culture, your subculture, your whatever, work very well here in America, and which ones not so much. A conversation around this mode of thinking is where we are going to find progress, genuine progress for our country, even in this trying and difficult time where fascism and demagoguery is attempting to return to the earth and needs to be stopped. Because if we don't, I don't think humanity's tenure as the custodians of the earth is gonna last too terribly much longer. But that's where I'm gonna call it for today. Thank you everyone for listening, and do svidaniya.